A young girl and her father vanished during a family vacation in 1970, leaving loved ones searching for answers. But 20 years later, investigators search an abandoned warehouse, and what they discover inside changes everything. The summer of 1970 unfolded like any other in the quiet town of Amityville, Long Island. Maple Street displayed its usual parade of sprinklers watering meticulously kept lawns, children riding bicycles with playing cards clipped to spokes, and neighbors exchanging pleasantries over white picket fences. Among these ordinary scenes, the Peterson family maintained their comfortable routine at number 42. Thomas Peterson adjusted his characteristic white mustache, prematurely white for his 42 years, as he helped his 8-year-old daughter Olivia pack her collection of labeled glass jars for their upcoming trip. His weathered hands, bearing the calluses of 15 years of service with the Suffolk County Fire Department, moved with surprising gentleness as he wrapped each jar in newspaper. "Dad, do you think we'll find ghost crabs at Montauk? Jenny Miller said they come out at night and steal your stuff," Olivia asked, her blonde pigtails bobbing as she placed her rainbow-striped t-shirt into the suitcase. Thomas chuckled. "They're not interested in your socks, sweetheart, but we'll definitely see some fascinating creatures near those rock formations I told you about." In the kitchen, Rebecca Peterson checked their trip itinerary one final time. Her literature classes at Amityville Elementary were covered by a substitute. Her rose garden had been tended, and now all that remained was packing the family's blue 1967 Chevrolet Impala for their 3-day vacation to Montauk Point. The lighthouse there had fascinated Thomas since childhood, and he had promised Olivia they would climb to the top this summer. "Is everything ready for tomorrow?" Rebecca called out, tucking a strand of brown hair behind her ear. "Almost," Thomas replied. "Just making sure Sir Poulos has his travel outfit." Olivia giggled, clutching her beloved stuffed rabbit. "He gets seasick without his special vest." The following morning, July 15th, the Petersons departed early, the Impala's trunk carefully packed with fishing gear, summer clothes, and a picnic basket. The drive east through Long Island was filled with Olivia's excited chatter about marine biology facts she'd learned from her school library books. Thomas occasionally glanced at Rebecca in the rearview mirror, both sharing silent smiles at their daughter's enthusiasm. Their arrival at the Seaside Motel was greeted by Jennifer Cooper, the 47-year-old manager with salt and pepper hair and a welcoming smile. "Room 12 for the Petersons. It's our family suite, 2 connecting rooms with an ocean view." "Perfect," Thomas said, accepting the key. "We were hoping to visit the lighthouse this afternoon. Is the path still where I remember it?" Their first day passed peacefully. The family explored the historic lighthouse, Thomas patiently explaining to Olivia about maritime navigation, while Rebecca captured them posing at the base with her new Polaroid camera. They collected seashells along the shore, Olivia categorizing each find with scientific precision beyond her years. "This one's a jingle shell," she declared, holding up an amber-colored specimen. "They make natural wind chimes when they're strung together." That evening, they dined at the motel's modest restaurant, planning their activities for the following day as twilight settled over the Atlantic. The morning of July 16th brought a slight change of plans. Rebecca awakened with a familiar throbbing behind her eyes. The migraine she'd been fighting off for days had finally arrived. Thomas placed a cool compress on her forehead while Olivia sat concerned at the edge of the bed. "You two should still go exploring," Rebecca insisted, squinting against the morning light filtering through the curtains. "I'll rest and join you for lunch." "Are you sure?" Thomas asked, his brow furrowed with concern. Rebecca managed a smile. "Completely. Just come back with stories for me." At 7:15 that morning, Thomas knelt to help Olivia tie her shoelaces while Rebecca watched from the bed. The girl wore her favorite striped shirt, red and blue horizontal bands that she insisted helped her spot the coolest shells on the beach. "We won't go far," Thomas promised. "Just to the lighthouse and maybe along those rock formations." He leaned over to kiss Rebecca's forehead. "Back by noon, with treasures and tales." Rebecca dozed fitfully after they left, the migraine medication slowly taking effect. When she finally awoke and checked the bedside clock, she was startled to see it was already past 1 in the afternoon. The connecting room remained silent. No giggles from Olivia, no rumble of Thomas's voice recounting their morning adventure. Worry gnawed at her as she dressed quickly and headed to the front desk. Jennifer Cooper hadn't seen them return. The parking lot still held their blue Impala, keys in the ignition as Thomas sometimes left them when planning a quick return. Rebecca's anxiety mounted as she walked along the beach, calling their names against the crash of waves. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as she scanned the shoreline, her heart stopping when she spotted them. 2 pairs of sandals placed neatly side by side near the water's edge, Thomas's worn brown leather ones, and Olivia's pink rubber flip-flops with yellow stars. She stood frozen, staring at the abandoned footwear. Thomas was meticulous about water safety, especially with Olivia. He would never take her swimming in the rough surf that day, marked by yellow caution flags. Rebecca's teacher instincts kicked in. She began methodically questioning every beachgoer, every ice cream vendor, every lifeguard. A man with a white mustache and a little blonde girl, wearing a striped shirt? She repeated countless times, receiving only apologetic headshakes in response. By 3:30 that afternoon, Rebecca pushed through the door of Montauk's small police station, her composed exterior barely containing rising panic. Sergeant Bill Hopper, a weathered 53-year-old with salt and pepper hair and 25 years on the force, took her statement with professional calm. "Most likely they're just exploring somewhere without cell service, ma'am," he reassured her, though his eyes reflected growing concern as he noted the details. Within hours, Coast Guard vessels were patrolling offshore, while local volunteers combed the beaches and wooded areas near the lighthouse. As darkness fell, portable lights illuminated search areas, and Rebecca sat alone on the motel veranda, jumping at every approaching footstep. By midnight, the search had expanded to include professional divers checking the waters near the rocky outcroppings. Police Chief Edward Miller arrived personally to oversee operations, his grave expression betraying the seriousness with which the disappearance of a firefighter and his child was being treated. "We're exploring all possibilities, Mrs. Peterson," Miller assured her. "Sometimes people get disoriented in the park trails." Rebecca knew better. Thomas had an impeccable sense of direction. It was part of what made him an excellent firefighter. Something was deeply wrong. As dawn approached on July 17th, Rebecca watched volunteers with flashlights still moving across the darkened beach. Her exhaustion battled with adrenaline as she noticed Sergeant Hopper consulting with Chief Miller, their hushed tones and worried glances communicating more than their reassuring words had. While the pre-dawn hours crept forward and search teams changed shifts, Rebecca noticed an open folder on Sergeant Hopper's desk containing a photograph of a young woman. As she approached for a closer look, Chief Miller quickly closed the folder, offering a strained smile. "Completely different cases, Mrs. Peterson," he said firmly, sliding the folder into a drawer. "Completely different." Chief Miller's hasty dismissal only heightened Rebecca's suspicions. She glanced once more at the drawer where he'd hidden the folder, making a mental note to find out more about this supposedly different case when she had the chance. Dawn broke over Montauk Point with the first rays of sunlight filtering through the station's dusty windows. Rebecca awoke with a start, momentarily disoriented to find herself slumped in a hard wooden chair at the police station. The night shift officers were changing over, their hushed voices and the smell of fresh coffee pulling her fully into consciousness. Her neck ached from the awkward sleeping position, but physical discomfort paled against the hollowness in her chest, where certainty about her family's safety should have been. Sergeant Hopper approached with a styrofoam cup. "Coffee, Mrs. Peterson? We're having a coordination meeting in 5 minutes." In the cramped back room of the station, police officers, Coast Guard representatives, and volunteer coordinators gathered around a large map of Montauk spread across a table. Chief Miller stood at the head, marking areas with colored pins. "We've covered the immediate beach area and primary trails," he explained, circling sections with a red marker. "Today we expand to these secondary forest paths, these rock formations, and extend our water search to this perimeter." His finger traced a wide arc in the ocean. Rebecca studied the map intently, trying to envision where Thomas might have taken Olivia. Had they ventured onto one of those unmarked trails? Could they have somehow become trapped in a remote cove cut off by the tide? By 8:20 that morning, the distinctive thump-thump of helicopter blades cut through the air as a Coast Guard UH-1 Huey began systematic sweeps over the coastline. Rebecca stood in the parking lot, shielding her eyes against the sun as she watched the aircraft hover periodically, observers scanning the terrain below with high-powered binoculars. "They'll find something," reassured Frank Watkins, who had arrived from Amityville after hearing about his colleague's disappearance. The 45-year-old firefighter had worked alongside Thomas for over a decade. "If anyone can survive out there, it's Tom." The search party set out again with renewed determination. A K-9 unit arrived from Suffolk County, the handler explaining to Rebecca how they would use Olivia's pajama top from the motel room to give the dogs her scent. "Dogs can detect traces even days old," the handler explained as the German Shepherd sniffed the garment intently. "Especially a child's scent, it's quite distinctive." While the dog teams vanished into the wooded areas behind the lighthouse, a new figure arrived at the command center. Detective James Morales, 34, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, introduced himself as the lead investigator assigned from Suffolk County. "I'd like to retrace their known movements," he told Rebecca. "Let's start with breakfast yesterday. Where did they eat?" Together they walked to the Lighthouse Cafe where Marge Donovan, the 61-year-old waitress with her silver hair in a tight bun, remembered serving Thomas and Olivia. "The little girl had strawberry ice cream at 10 in the morning, Marge recalled with a fond smile. "Her daddy said it was vacation, so why not? She was wearing that striped shirt, talking a mile a minute about the shells she hoped to find." She paused, brow furrowing. "Come to think of it, Mr. Peterson asked me about some of the less-traveled paths around here, said his daughter wanted to find shells tourists don't usually spot." Morales jotted this information in his notebook, his expression thoughtful. "And what time did they leave?" "Around 10:30, I'd say. Lighthouse keeper mentioned seeing them on the observation deck shortly after." Back at the motel, Rebecca sat on Olivia's unmade bed, clutching her daughter's stuffed rabbit. The connecting rooms felt cavernous in their emptiness, personal items frozen in a tableau of interrupted vacation. Thomas's razor by the sink, Olivia's book splayed open on the nightstand, bookmarked at chapter 7. The telephone rang, startling her. It was her sister Martha calling from Boston, having just heard the news. "I'm coming down, Beck," Martha insisted. "You shouldn't be alone right now." "They're going to find them," Rebecca responded, her voice hollow even to her own ears. As afternoon approached, Detective Morales requested to interview Frank Watkins. Rebecca watched through the station window as they conversed in the parking lot, Watkins gesticulating with increasing agitation. When they finished, Morales's expression had darkened considerably. "Mrs. Peterson," he said carefully when he returned, "did your husband mention any financial concerns recently?" The question struck her like a physical blow. "What? No. Why would you ask that?" Morales hesitated. Mr. Watkins mentioned Thomas had asked about low-interest loans and seemed anxious about money matters in recent weeks. "That's absurd," Rebecca countered, though a niggling doubt formed. Thomas had been spending more time with their finances lately, often after she'd gone to bed. At Morales's request, they visited the local Montauk Bank to request faxed copies of the Petersons' recent bank statements. The records showed nothing unusual, the predictable pattern of a middle-class family's expenses and Thomas's regular deposits from the fire department. By early evening, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. The Coast Guard captain approached Chief Miller with obvious reluctance. "We need to recall the boats," he explained. "Storm's moving in faster than expected. Visibility will be 0 within the hour." Rebecca watched helplessly as the search vessels returned to harbor, the helicopter making a final sweep before darkness and weather forced its retreat. The thought of Thomas and Olivia out there, possibly injured, facing a storm alone, threatened to shatter her composure entirely. That night, as rain lashed against the motel windows and thunder rattled the glass. Rebecca methodically reorganized Thomas and Olivia's belongings, unwilling to unpack their suitcases completely. Each item represented a silent promise of their return. Jennifer Cooper, the motel manager, knocked softly before entering with a tray of tea and sandwiches. "You need to eat," she insisted gently, setting the tray down. "I know what you're going through." Rebecca looked up questioningly. "Lost my husband to a fishing accident 10 years ago," Jennifer explained, her eyes showing a familiar pain. 3 days they searched before finding his boat. I know that waiting is its own special hell. As dawn broke on July 18th, the storm had passed, leaving the beach transformed. Rebecca walked along the reshuffled shoreline with volunteers, searching for any evidence that might have been exposed by the turbulent seas. When the 5th day of searching ended with no concrete results beyond Thomas's recovered straw hat, Detective Morales found Rebecca staring at the ocean as sunset painted the water copper and gold. He approached hesitantly, a folder in his hands. "Mrs. Peterson, we checked your husband's phone records from the past few weeks," he said quietly. "There are several calls to a number in Montauk, always made when you were teaching classes, to someone named Arthur Mason, a former Coast Guard member who owns a boat called Sea Whisper." Rebecca stared at the folder in Morales' hands, her mind racing. Who is Arthur Mason, and why would Thomas be calling him in secret? The detective gestured toward his car. "Let's discuss this somewhere private." Early the next morning, Detective Morales and Officer Sarah Jenkins approached the fishing pier, where several charter boats were docked. The Sea Whisper, a well-maintained 28-foot vessel, swayed gently in the morning tide. A weathered man with salt and pepper hair and deeply tanned skin was arranging fishing equipment on the deck. "Arthur Mason?" Morales called, flashing his badge. Mason straightened, his expression immediately guarded. "That's me. Something wrong, officers?" When questioned about the phone calls from Thomas Peterson, Mason's shoulders tensed visibly. "Peterson? Oh, the firefighter. Yeah, he called about fishing charters. Wanted information about good spots to take his kid. Nothing unusual, just offered him a professional courtesy discount. One public servant to another." Morales maintained a neutral expression. "When did you last speak with him?" "Few days before he came to Montauk, I think. Was planning to take them out this weekend if they decided to extend their stay." Mason's eyes darted toward his boat. "Shame what happened. Hope they turn up." After leaving Mason, Morales and Officer Jenkins headed to the harbor master's office to check the marina records. The log confirmed that the Sea Whisper had departed at 6:30 in the morning on July 16th and returned at 2 in the afternoon, during the exact window when Thomas and Olivia disappeared. "He has witnesses," Morales noted, reviewing his notes. 2 tourists from New Jersey confirmed they were on Mason's boat for a morning fishing charter that day. Rebecca, who had insisted on accompanying them to the harbor office, studied the logbook with narrowed eyes. "Wait, look at his other trips. The Sea Whisper usually returns around 4. Why did he come back early on that specific day?" Before Morales could respond, a navy blue Ford Mustang pulled into the parking lot. Richard Peterson, Rebecca's older brother, emerged and rushed toward her, engulfing her in a tight embrace. "Beck, I came as soon as I could get away from work," he said, his voice strained with concern. "Any news?" Rebecca shook her head, leading him back to the motel. In their room, Richard paced while Rebecca updated him on the search efforts. "You need to come home, Beck," he finally said, his voice gentle but firm. "It's been nearly a week. You're exhausted, not sleeping. There are practical matters to handle: bills, your job, the house." "I can't leave," Rebecca responded, her voice breaking. "What if they come back and I'm not here?" "The police will continue searching," Richard argued. "You're running yourself into the ground. Thomas wouldn't want that." Their argument was interrupted by a call from Morales, requesting Rebecca's presence at the station for a final briefing. At the Montauk Police Station, Chief Miller explained that while the investigation would continue, the intensive search operation would be scaled back. "We've covered every inch of accessible terrain," he explained, genuine regret in his eyes. "The Coast Guard has searched 12 miles in each direction. We'll maintain regular patrols and follow any leads that emerge." He pressed his personal business card into Rebecca's palm. "My home number is on the back. Call anytime, day or night, if you remember anything or just need an update." That evening, Rebecca sat silently in Richard's Mustang as they headed west on Montauk Highway. She stared into the rearview mirror, watching the lighthouse grow smaller until it disappeared completely around a bend. The following morning, Rebecca stood frozen at her own front door in Amityville, keys trembling in her hand. The cheerful yellow house with white trim suddenly seemed like a museum of her previous life, a display of what had been lost. Richard gently guided her inside. "One step at a time, Beck." The silence of the house enveloped her. Mail had piled up on the floor beneath the mail slot. The roses in her garden, visible through the kitchen window, needed deadheading. When Rebecca finally forced herself to enter Olivia's bedroom, the pain was physical. Thomas had painted glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling in accurate constellations. Serpulus, the stuffed rabbit's twin that stayed at home, sat propped against the pillow as if waiting for his owner's return. In the kitchen, Rebecca began organizing methodically: bills, appointment reminders, children's artwork Olivia had brought home before summer break. She created a timeline of the days leading up to their vacation, searching for any clue she might have missed. That afternoon, drawn by an inexplicable instinct, Rebecca entered Thomas's small home office. The desk was tidy, as he always kept it. On impulse, she checked the false bottom drawer, a hiding place Thomas thought she didn't know about. Inside, she found a folder containing handwritten notes about coastal pumping stations he had inspected. Repeated discrepancies between allocated funds and actual materials used, one note read. "Pressure valves rated below required specifications," said another. That night, Rebecca called her cousin Martha in Boston. Thomas was investigating something at work. He made notes about budget discrepancies and ignored specifications at coastal pumping stations. He never mentioned any of this to me. The next morning, Rebecca began creating an investigation wall in the kitchen, pinning newspaper clippings about the disappearance alongside a map of Montauk marked with red pushpins indicating points of interest. As she worked, the telephone rang. Detective Morales informed her that Arthur Mason had abruptly left Montauk, telling neighbors he was taking an extended fishing trip to Florida. After hanging up, Rebecca returned to Thomas's office, determined to understand what he had discovered. Searching through his bookshelf, she found something tucked between two fire code manuals: a photograph of Thomas standing beside an unfamiliar man in front of a coastal pumping station. Turning it over, she found an inscription in her husband's handwriting: "Carl Burnett, Works Inspector, Montauk, Meeting 712. Don't mention to R." Rebecca stared at the photograph, her hand trembling slightly. Don't mention to R. To her. Thomas had deliberately kept his meeting with this man a secret. The realization stung, opening another small wound alongside the gaping absence of her family. September 8th arrived with merciless regularity, marking the first day of the new school year. Standing before her bathroom mirror at 7:30 in the morning, Rebecca applied concealer to the dark circles beneath her eyes. The woman reflected back was barely recognizable, thinner, paler, with a perpetual furrow between her brows that hadn't been there 2 months earlier. She smoothed her navy blue dress, selected deliberately for its somber professionalism, and practiced a smile that never reached her eyes. The teacher's lounge at Amityville Elementary fell silent when Rebecca entered. Colleagues who had sent casseroles and sympathy cards now seemed uncertain how to behave around her. Finally, Elaine Collins rose from her chair and wrapped Rebecca in an awkward embrace. "We're all so glad you're back," Elaine whispered, though her eyes betrayed her concern over Rebecca's haggard appearance. Teaching provided structure, but little comfort. During her third-period literature class, Rebecca froze mid-sentence while explaining Robert Frost's The Road Not Taken. A blonde girl in the back row was wearing a striped shirt reminiscent of Olivia's favorite. For a disorienting moment, Rebecca thought she saw her daughter's face, causing her to lose her place completely. 20 curious faces stared as she struggled to regain composure. After school, Rebecca drove directly to the Suffolk County Police Headquarters. Detective Morales greeted her with a professional nod, escorting her to his cluttered desk where the Peterson case file lay open, noticeably thinner after being transferred to the cold case division. "I wish I had better news," Morales admitted. "We've interviewed Mason's neighbors in Florida, but they haven't seen him. The Coast Guard has no record of him filing any extended sailing plans." That evening, Rebecca expanded her investigation wall, carefully adding the photograph of Thomas with Carl Burnett. She connected it with red yarn to Thomas's notes about the pumping stations, creating a visual web of potential relationships. The wall had become both obsession and lifeline, a tangible representation of her refusal to give up. On September 30th, Rebecca visited the County Public Works Department, requesting inspection records for the coastal pumping stations Thomas had noted. The clerk behind the counter examined her identification with furrowed brows. "These records require special authorization," she explained. "Environmental inspection reports are restricted access due to security concerns." Undeterred, Rebecca stationed herself in the parking lot, watching employees exit for lunch. When a stocky man matching the photograph's image emerged, she approached directly. "Mr. Burnett? I'm Rebecca Peterson, Thomas Peterson's wife." The color drained from Carl Burnett's face. His eyes darted toward the building before settling back on Rebecca with forced composure. "Mrs. Peterson, I was sorry to hear about your loss," he said carefully. "But I only knew your husband professionally. Some routine inspections, nothing more." "Then why did he make a note not to tell me about meeting you?" Rebecca pressed, holding up a copy of the photograph. Burnett's jaw tightened. "I don't know what you're implying, but I have another appointment. Excuse me." He hurried toward his car, pulling out his phone the moment Rebecca stepped away. From her own vehicle, Rebecca observed Burnett making an agitated call. 15 minutes later, a blue Cadillac pulled alongside him. Rebecca quickly noted the license plate as Burnett climbed inside. That evening, Morales called with an edge to his voice. "Mrs. Peterson, I received a formal complaint from the Public Works Department about your behavior today. They're alleging harassment." "They're hiding something," Rebecca insisted. "Thomas found irregularities in those pumping stations, and now he's gone." Christmas Eve arrived with cruel festivity. At Richard and Jane's house, the dining table was set with holiday china and flickering candles. The empty chair beside Rebecca loomed conspicuously, a void that carols and eggnog couldn't fill. After dinner, Jane cornered Rebecca in the kitchen while loading the dishwasher. "Rebecca, it's been 6 months," she said gently. "The children are getting frightened by your behavior. You need professional help." "What does that mean, my behavior?" Rebecca demanded. "The investigation wall, the files everywhere, talking about Thomas and Olivia in the present tense," Jane replied. "You're not sleeping, barely eating. You need grief counseling." "I'm not grieving because they're not dead," Rebecca snapped, though doubt crept unbidden into her consciousness. What if Jane was right? Near midnight, alone in Richard's guest room, Rebecca unwrapped a small present she'd purchased for Olivia, a book of children's poetry with watercolor illustrations. She placed it carefully on the nightstand, as though her daughter might find it there come morning. 2 days later, returning to her empty house, Rebecca discovered an envelope in her mailbox with no return address. Inside was a crudely assembled note made from newspaper clippings. "Stop asking questions about the pumping stations if you don't want to end up like your family." Her hands shaking, Rebecca immediately drove to Morales's office, presenting the letter in a plastic bag. "This changes things," the detective said, his expression grave as he examined the threat. "Threats like this indicate you may be on the right track." While the harsh winter of 1971 settled over Long Island, bringing snow that muffled the world in white silence, Rebecca received an unexpected late-night phone call. "Mrs. Peterson, this is Jennifer Cooper from the Seaside Motel in Montauk. Forgive me for calling so late, but a fisherman found something today that you need to see immediately. A cloth doll washed up on the beach with the initials OP embroidered on the dress. exactly like the one your daughter was carrying that day." Rebecca clutched the phone so tightly, her knuckles turned white. "The doll? You're certain it has OP on it?" "Yes, embroidered in blue thread on the dress," Jennifer confirmed. "Ernest Willis found it this morning near the rock formations." Without hesitation, Rebecca threw essential items into an overnight bag. Sleep was impossible as her mind raced with possibilities. By 6:30 the next morning, she was already on the road to Montauk, pushing her Impala well beyond the speed limit as light snow dusted the highway. The radio warned of an approaching storm system, but weather was the least of her concerns. The familiar coastline of Montauk emerged through the morning mist as Rebecca arrived just before 10. She drove directly to the police station where Jennifer had arranged to meet her with the recovered item. Inside, Rebecca's hands trembled as Sergeant Hopper handed her a plastic evidence bag containing a waterlogged cloth doll. Despite the damage from months in seawater, the blue dress was unmistakable, as were the carefully stitched initials OP that Rebecca herself had embroidered last Christmas. "It's hers," she whispered, tears forming. "This is Olivia's doll." Detective Morales, who had driven out from Suffolk County upon hearing the news, arrived looking more disheveled than usual, sporting several days' worth of stubble. He immediately organized a meeting with the local authorities, spreading detailed ocean current maps across the table. "Objects in the water follow predictable patterns," he explained, tracing paths with his finger. "This doll could have been trapped somewhere, perhaps in those rock formations, before breaking free during recent storms." Rebecca listened intently, hope rekindling. "Does this mean their bodies could have been caught somewhere too?" Morales exchanged glances with Hopper. "It's possible, which is why we're organizing a focused search of this area." By early afternoon, Rebecca stood on the beach with Ernest Willis, the 67-year-old fisherman who had discovered the doll. His weathered face creased with sympathy as he pointed to a jagged rock formation extending into the water. "Found it right there, ma'am, wedged between those two big rocks. Locals call that formation Devil's Teeth, on account of how they look at low tide. Current pushes things in there sometimes, holds on to them for months." A specialized search team arrived shortly afterward, equipped with metal detectors and portable sonar devices. The coordinator, a former Navy diver, explained their approach to Rebecca. "We have technology now that wasn't available during the initial search. These sonar units can create detailed images of anything trapped in underwater crevices." That evening, Rebecca found herself back in the same room at the Seaside Motel where her family had stayed. Jennifer Cooper brought homemade chicken soup and fresh bread, sitting with Rebecca as darkness fell. "The sea gives back what it takes eventually," Jennifer said softly. "In 30 years here, I've seen messages in bottles return after decades. Wedding rings wash up years after being lost. The ocean has its own timeline." Early the next morning, Rebecca sat alone on the cold beach watching divers in black wetsuits preparing to examine the Devil's Teeth area. Snow flurries danced around her, but she remained motionless, wrapped in Thomas's old coat, eyes fixed on the water that had taken her family. After 2 days of intensive searching yielded no further discoveries, Rebecca reluctantly returned to Amityville. The doll, now dried and somewhat restored, traveled with her, both painful reminder and precious connection. Upon arriving home, she was surprised to find a young man waiting on her porch, camera hanging around his neck. He introduced himself as Jack Stevens, a 26-year-old reporter for the Amityville Gazette. "Mrs. Peterson, I've been following your family's case," he said earnestly. "I believe there's more to this story than a tragic accident." Initially skeptical, Rebecca nonetheless invited him inside. Jack's eyes widened upon seeing her investigation wall, immediately photographing it with his professional Nikon. "This is impressive," he admitted. "I have a friend in the county records office who can access documents that usually require warrants. Maybe I can help." 3 days later, Rebecca and Jack sat hunched over microfiche readers in the county library, methodically reviewing years of public records related to the coastal pumping stations. Jack's press credentials had opened doors Rebecca couldn't, revealing contracts and budget approvals that painted a disturbing picture. "Look at these allocations," Jack pointed out. The maintenance budget tripled over 3 years with no explanation. They relocated to Jack's cluttered apartment, walls covered with news clippings from previous investigations. Together, they compiled a list of everyone involved in approving the pumping station contracts, circling recurring names that appeared throughout the documentation. "Wait," Rebecca said suddenly, pointing at a committee approval form. "Harold Winters, that's Montauk's police chief. He was on the budget committee?" Jack whistled low. "And look at this," he said, producing a document his contact had provided. "Winters officially requested your case be archived just 3 weeks after the disappearance. That's extraordinarily premature." Reviewing Thomas's bank statements again, they discovered something they'd missed before. A pattern of small cash deposits in the months before the disappearance, always under $500. "These could be bribes," Jack suggested. Or maybe Thomas was gathering evidence, accepting small payments to document who was involved. The next morning, as Rebecca prepared to return to Montauk with their discoveries, she found her car vandalized in the driveway. All 4 tires had been slashed, and under the windshield wiper was a note created from newspaper clippings. "Last warning, your daughter died crying for you, want the same fate." Turning the paper over with horror, she recognized a piece of the pink hair ribbon Olivia had been wearing the day she disappeared. Rebecca stared at the pink ribbon, her world tilting on its axis. This wasn't just a threat. It was proof that whoever was behind this had direct physical contact with Olivia on the day she disappeared. With shaking hands, she retrieved the ribbon using a pencil, carefully placing it in a plastic sandwich bag before calling Jack. Within the hour, police officers were photographing her vandalized car, while Rebecca gave her statement. Neighbors peered from windows, whispering behind curtains as evidence technicians collected the threatening note in an official evidence bag. The pink ribbon, that tiny scrap of fabric, had transformed her private investigation into an active criminal case. By mid-morning, Rebecca and Jack sat across from Detective William Harrison in the state police headquarters in Hauppauge. The 47-year-old investigator from the cold case unit had a military bearing and penetrating eyes that missed nothing as he studied the recreated investigation wall they had assembled in the conference room. "I appreciate your thoroughness, Mrs. Peterson," Harrison said, examining the connections between Thomas's notes and the pumping station contracts. "Most civilians would have given up months ago." Shortly before noon, a forensic technician entered with a preliminary report on the ribbon. "This fabric hasn't been exposed to seawater or elements," she explained. "It's been preserved in a dry environment, possibly stored as a keepsake or trophy." Harrison's expression darkened as he processed this information. "That means someone deliberately kept this and has held on to it for over 6 months." At 2:20 that afternoon, Harrison placed a call to Chief Winters, deliberately using the speakerphone so Rebecca and Jack could listen. "Chief, I'm curious why you requested the Peterson case be archived after only 3 weeks. Standard protocol for missing persons, especially involving minors, is a minimum 3-month active investigation period." Winters' response came with forced casualness. "Limited resources, Detective. With no evidence of foul play and the likelihood of a tragic accident, I made a judgment call." A judgment call while serving on the committee that approved the pumping station funding Thomas Peterson was investigating, Harrison countered. The silence that followed spoke volumes. By late afternoon, Rebecca returned home with a police escort. A uniformed officer parked discreetly in a cruiser across the street. The threat had elevated the case to require protection, a development that paradoxically brought her a grim satisfaction. Finally, someone in authority believed her. Meanwhile, Jack visited his contact at the Public Works Department. "Kevin Mercer, A nervous 34-year-old administrative assistant had been secretly photocopying documents for weeks. They create fake emergencies to justify no-bid contracts, Kevin explained in hushed tones, spreading papers across his kitchen table. See this valve replacement project? Budgeted at $450,000 when the actual cost should be around $80,000. The difference disappears into shell companies. Jack photographed each document methodically. Who signs off on these emergency authorizations? That's what's crazy. It goes all the way up to county commissioners. This isn't just a few corrupt inspectors. The next morning, Rebecca met Harrison at his office, where an engineering consultant had translated Thomas's technical notes into layman's terms. Your husband documented structural problems that were deliberately ignored, Harrison explained. Issues that could cause toxic leakage into the groundwater. These weren't just financial crimes, they were endangering public safety. That afternoon, Rebecca revisited Thomas's fire station, finding Frank Watkins alone in the break room. She showed him her husband's notes about the structural failures. Did Thomas ever mention these concerns to you? She asked. Frank's expression shifted from surprise to recognition. Tom asked me about internal reporting procedures a few weeks before your trip. He mentioned being worried the problem went higher than expected. I assumed he meant department brass, not county officials. By evening, Harrison had created an organizational chart in his office, placing Carl Burnett as the middleman between politicians and the scheme's operators. Burnett interfaces between the contractors and officials, making sure everyone gets their cut. Thomas stumbled onto this accidentally during routine inspections. Rebecca returned home exhausted, calling Martha to update her on the case's developments. It's not just about money, Martha. Thomas discovered they were ignoring safety issues that could poison the coastal waters. Someone decided that was worth killing for. At 2:15 in the morning, Rebecca jolted awake to the sound of breaking glass. Heart pounding, she heard her police guard radio for backup, while footsteps indicated he was intercepting someone at the rear of the house. Minutes later, Harrison arrived with additional officers, examining the wallet of the apprehended intruder in Rebecca's brightly lit kitchen. Ex-con with known connections to Carl Burnett, he explained grimly. This proves you're getting close to the truth. The following morning, as Rebecca prepared coffee in her kitchen still littered with evidence markers from the break-in, Harrison received an urgent call. His expression transformed as he listened, motioning for Rebecca to sit down. A body has been recovered by fishermen 20 miles offshore, he said after hanging up. It's been in the water for months, but preliminary identification through dental records indicates it's Arthur Mason, with a bullet wound to the back of the head that was clearly not self-inflicted. The discovery of Mason's body with a bullet wound to the head transformed the investigation completely. No longer was this merely a missing persons case or even a potential accident. This was now officially a homicide investigation with implications that reached far beyond what Rebecca had initially feared. In the county morgue's antiseptic chill, Dr. Patricia Harris, the chief medical examiner, stood over Mason's remains. Her gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun as she pointed to specific areas on the body, while explaining her findings to Harrison and Rebecca. Based on decomposition rates in ocean water at winter temperatures, I estimate he's been dead approximately 3 months, Dr. Harris explained. The entry wound here, she indicated the base of the skull, shows a distinctive upward trajectory consistent with an execution-style killing, likely with the victim kneeling. Rebecca fought back nausea, not from the grim surroundings, but from the implications. So Mason was murdered to silence him? It appears so, Harrison nodded grimly. And not by amateurs. Later that morning, Harrison presented his evidence before Judge Timothy Waters in the county courthouse, seeking search warrants for Mason's abandoned property and his boat, which had been sold months earlier. Your Honor, we have established clear connections between Mason, the corruption scheme, and the Peterson disappearances, Harrison argued. Furthermore, Mason's execution-style murder indicates an organized criminal enterprise willing to eliminate potential witnesses. The judge granted the warrants, and by early afternoon, a forensic team descended on Mason's empty Montauk house. Rebecca and Jack watched from Harrison's unmarked car as technicians in white coveralls removed floorboards after a metal detector indicated a hidden compartment beneath. "We've got something," called out the team leader, pulling a waterproof document case from the exposed cavity. Inside the case, Harrison found meticulous financial records, a virtual ledger of corruption. Names were recorded with initials alongside regular payment amounts. HW $15,000 appeared quarterly, as did CB $25,000 and several others. HW is definitely Harold Winters, Harrison confirmed, comparing the dates to Thomas's notes, and CB is Carl Burnett. Mason kept records of every bribe, every participant. That evening, Rebecca, Jack, and Harrison worked late into the night in the makeshift incident room, connecting Mason's records with Thomas's notes about the pumping stations. The picture that emerged was devastating, a systematic corruption scheme involving millions in diverted funds, with tentacles reaching into multiple agencies. Thomas must have stumbled onto this during routine inspections, Harrison theorized. As a firefighter with engineering knowledge, he would have recognized the safety violations immediately. The next morning, the investigation team traveled to Bridgeport, Connecticut, where Mason's boat, Sea Whisper, was now docked. The new owner, John Winters, who had no relation to the police chief despite the shared surname, was a bewildered retiree who couldn't understand why state police were swarming over his pleasure craft. "I bought it fair and square last October," he protested. "Clean title, full documentation." While Harrison assured the man he wasn't under suspicion, forensic technicians treated the boat's surfaces with luminol. Under ultraviolet light, large areas of the deck and cabin glowed with an eerie blue luminescence, indicating blood traces that someone had attempted to clean. "The blood patterns are consistent with a violent struggle," the lead technician explained, photographing the evidence. "We'll need samples for DNA testing, but the cleaning pattern suggests a deliberate attempt to remove evidence." By early afternoon, with evidence mounting rapidly, Harrison ordered Carl Burnett's arrest. Officers descended on his luxurious Southampton home, leading a handcuffed Burnett past his sobbing wife, while additional agents boxed documents from his home office. At the interrogation room at State Police Headquarters, Burnett sat with his attorney, the confident facade he'd maintained for months finally crumbling as Harrison methodically laid out the evidence against him. Mason's financial records, the forensics from the boat, Thomas's documentation of the pumping station fraud. "We have you connected on all fronts, Carl," Harrison said evenly. "Mason kept detailed records, and your hired thug gave you up the moment we offered him a deal." Burnett's attorney leaned over, whispering urgently in his client's ear. The inspector's shoulders sagged as he absorbed whatever legal reality his lawyer had conveyed. "I want an agreement," Burnett finally said, defeat evident in his voice. "I'll tell you everything, including what happened to Peterson and the girl." From behind the one-way glass in the observation room, Rebecca watched with Jack and an assistant district attorney as Burnett began his confession. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear the beginning of his statement. "Mason was just supposed to scare Thomas," Burnett explained. "Show him we had influence and could make trouble for him if he didn't back off. Nobody expected the girl to be with him. There was a struggle on the boat." As Burnett continued describing the confrontation on the Sea Whisper, Rebecca abruptly stood and left the observation room. The clinical description of her family's final moments was more than she could bear. Jack followed her into the hallway, offering silent support as she leaned against the wall, breathing deeply to maintain composure. Later that night, Harrison visited Rebecca's home, explaining the rapidly unfolding consequences of Burnett's confession. "We're arresting Winters and 5 others tonight," he informed her. "The entire scheme is unraveling. Burnett's testimony will ensure convictions." Rebecca nodded, emotionally drained but vindicated. After months of being dismissed and doubted, the truth was finally emerging. Her investigation wall, once considered the product of grief-induced obsession, had proven prophetic. The following morning, as newspaper headlines announced the arrests of high-ranking county officials, Rebecca's phone rang. The male voice on the other end was unfamiliar, trembling with fear. "Mrs. Peterson, I know you won't believe me, but I worked for Mason. I was on the boat that day, and what Burnett is telling isn't the whole truth. Your daughter didn't die in the sea. I saw her alive last when Mason handed her to someone at the private dock on Star Island." Rebecca clutched the phone with such force, her knuckles turned white, the anonymous caller's words reverberating in her mind. Olivia alive, handed off at Star Island. A wave of conflicting emotions crashed over her, desperate hope colliding with protective skepticism. "Who is this? How do you know this?" she demanded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't say more on the phone. They're watching me too," the man replied before abruptly hanging up. Rebecca immediately called Harrison, who arrived within the hour alongside technicians who installed a call tracing device on her telephone. "If he contacts you again, keep him talking at least 30 seconds, the technician instructed. "That's all we need to triangulate his location." While they waited for another call, Rebecca paced her living room, mind racing with possibilities. Could Olivia truly be alive after all this time? The thought was simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying. To allow herself to believe, only to be devastated again, might break her completely. Later that afternoon, police escorted Peter Gallagher, a thin, nervous man with darting eyes, into the station. Identified through phone records as Mason's former assistant, he had been located at a motel just outside Suffolk County. In the interrogation room, Gallagher recounted the events of July 16th with trembling hands. Thomas fought back when Mason tried to force him onto the boat. There was a struggle, and Thomas fell, hitting his head on the gunwale. The little girl was screaming. Mason grabbed her, threatened that her mother would get hurt if she didn't quiet down. Harrison leaned forward, his expression intense. "What happened next, Peter?" Gallagher's hands fidgeted ceaselessly as he continued. "Mason made a call when we headed back to shore. We didn't go to the public marina. We went to a private dock on Star Island. There was a black Cadillac waiting. A couple took the girl. She was alive, terrified, but alive." Rebecca felt the room spin slightly, gripping the edge of the table to steady herself. "You're absolutely certain about this?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Yes," Gallagher nodded emphatically. "Mason told them to make her disappear. They said something about taking her far away, giving her a new life." By evening, Harrison had spread a detailed map of Montauk across his desk, with Star Island circled in red marker. "It's an exclusive area, private homes, invitation-only marina, perfect for an off-the-record handoff." Through the night, Harrison's team analyzed files of everyone connected to the corruption scheme, identifying those who were married, childless, and financially capable of suddenly relocating. 5 couples emerged as potential candidates. In her home that night, Rebecca opened a sealed box of Olivia's belongings that she had packed away months earlier when the pain of seeing them daily became too much. She held each item with renewed purpose: a school notebook, a favorite sweater, the matching pajamas to the ones Olivia had packed for Montauk. These weren't relics of a lost child anymore, but possessions that might soon be reunited with their owner. The following morning, Jack arrived at Rebecca's house with stacks of real estate records. "I've been researching sudden property sales after your family's disappearance," he explained, spreading papers across her kitchen table. "Looking for anyone who liquidated quickly and moved away." By midday, Harrison presented Rebecca with photographs of the 5 potential couples. "Study these carefully. See if any names connect to Thomas's notes or your memories." Rebecca examined each photograph methodically until she reached the 4th one. "Edward and Marianne Whitmore," she read, recognition dawning. "Thomas mentioned this name once, said Edward had unusual influence over budget approvals despite being just a town councilman." Harrison's team quickly uncovered that the Whitmores had sold their Southampton home just 3 weeks after the Petersons' disappearance, citing a sudden job transfer to Chicago. The timing couldn't be coincidental. Late in the afternoon, Jack burst into Harrison's office with a newspaper clipping from a Chicago Society page. The photograph showed the Whitmores at a charity gala 6 months after their move, accompanied by what the caption described as their recently adopted daughter. Though partially obscured, the child's profile was visible. "I can't be certain," Rebecca said, tears welling as she studied the enlarged but grainy image. "But the way she holds her hands, the shape of her face, it could be her." While Harrison coordinated with Illinois authorities to establish surveillance on the Whitmores' suburban Chicago residence, Rebecca sat motionless, staring at the photograph. To think Olivia had been alive all this time, forced into a new identity, while Rebecca mourned her, the thought was almost too painful to bear. As night fell, Harrison finalized arrangements for their flight to Chicago the next morning. The search warrant for the Whitmore residence was being processed through interstate judicial channels, with FBI assistance secured due to the kidnapping implications. Just before 11 that night, as Rebecca packed a small suitcase containing photographs of their family and Serpulos, the stuffed rabbit Olivia had loved since infancy, the telephone rang again. This time, the voice belonged to a woman, trembling and tearful. "Mrs. Peterson, this is Mary Ann Whitmore. I know you're investigating us. You need to understand that we saved her. We didn't want to be part of this. But now Edward has discovered everything and disappeared with Caroline. That's the name we gave her. He took her and promised that no one would ever find her alive." Rebecca's world tilted on its axis as Mary Ann Whitmore's words echoed through the phone line. Olivia, alive but in danger again, this time from the man who had pretended to be her father for nearly 2 years. "Where would he take her?" Rebecca demanded, gesturing frantically to Harrison, who was already alerting the technicians to trace the call. "I don't know for certain," Mary Ann sobbed. "He took her from school yesterday. He's had emergency identities prepared for months, fake passports, driver's licenses. He always said no one would ever connect us to what happened in Montauk." By 7:15 the next morning, Rebecca, Harrison, and Jack gathered at Rebecca's house, listening to the recorded call. Rebecca's face was pale but determined as she absorbed the reality that her daughter had been alive all this time, living as someone else's child while she mourned an empty grave. "We're dealing with a desperate suspect who knows we're closing in," Harrison explained during an emergency teleconference with FBI agents and Illinois police. A large map of the Great Lakes region dominated the table. "Whitmore has resources, connections, and a 9-year-old girl who represents his only bargaining chip." By mid-morning, Rebecca and Jack were boarding an emergency flight to Chicago, her small suitcase containing only essentials, including Serpulos and recent photographs of herself that might help Olivia remember her real mother. The thought that her daughter might not recognize her was a fresh wound atop years of pain. Special Agent Robert Coleman met them at O'Hare Airport, his no-nonsense demeanor softening slightly at Rebecca's evident distress. "We've secured Mrs. Whitmore's cooperation," he explained as they drove to Evanston. "She's providing details about properties, habits, anything that might help us locate them." The Whitmore residence in Evanston was exactly what Rebecca had imagined, a pristine Tudor-style home in an exclusive neighborhood. Inside, Mary Ann Whitmore sat rigid on an antique sofa, her perfectly coiffed hair contrasting with her red-rimmed eyes. When she saw Rebecca, she seemed to shrink into herself with shame. "I'll show you her room," Mary Ann offered quietly, leading them upstairs. The bedroom hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Lavender walls covered with posters of horses and ballet dancers, shelves lined with books and toys. A child's life, continuing while Rebecca had been drowning in grief. On the desk sat a school notebook with handwriting Rebecca instantly recognized, despite subtle changes. Childish drawings decorated the walls, many featuring beaches, a lighthouse, and stick figures of a family. "In the beginning, she had terrible nightmares," Mary Ann explained, her voice breaking. "She called for you. Edward forbade any mention of her previous life, said it would only traumatize her further. Eventually, she adapted, But she never stopped collecting shells, even here miles from any ocean. In Edward's office, Jack discovered a road atlas with several locations in northern Wisconsin circled in red ink. "Marianne, did Edward ever mention a cabin or vacation property up north?" he asked. "Yes," she nodded quickly. "We have a cabin near Lake Superior, very remote, only accessible by one road that's barely maintained. Edward loves taking Caroline fishing there in summer." By evening, the FBI command center in Chicago hummed with activity as teams analyzed satellite imagery of the Wisconsin wilderness. Coleman circled several remote cabins on the map, accessible only by secondary roads that would become treacherous in winter conditions. "The storm system moving in complicates everything," a meteorologist explained, pointing to radar images. "This area will see 12 to 15 inches of snow in the next 24 hours, making these access roads impassable." Search teams mobilized immediately, with Harrison coordinating with Wisconsin authorities over specialized radio equipment. "We need local knowledge of those roads before they're completely snowed in," he instructed, "and thermal imaging equipment if available." Late that night, Rebecca sat alone in her Chicago hotel room, staring at a recent school photograph of Caroline. The child had darker hair now, cut in a different style, but the smile was unmistakably Olivia's. The thought that her daughter had been celebrating birthdays, attending school events, and growing up just a few states away while Rebecca mourned was almost unbearable. At 5:30 the next morning, Rebecca, Jack, and an FBI tactical team boarded helicopters bound for northern Wisconsin. The sky hung ominously gray, the impending storm already sending advance scouts of snowflakes swirling around them. By 7:45, they had established a command post in the sheriff's office in Bayfield County, Wisconsin. Local deputies added crucial information to their search parameters, marking the map with areas that would become inaccessible first when the storm hit. "We've got something," announced a deputy, hanging up the radio. A gas station attendant in Washburn remembers serving Whitmore and a young girl late yesterday. They purchased supplies, snow chains, and extra gasoline. The girl appeared tired but unharmed. Hope surged through Rebecca as the search narrowed to a specific area. Every passing minute increased their chances of finding Olivia before the storm isolated them completely. The first substantial snowflakes were already beginning to fall as teams deployed to the identified sector. Just as the operation reached full deployment, the police radio crackled with an urgent message. A local caretaker who checked on seasonal properties had reported seeing lights in the Whitmore's normally vacant cabin. More alarming still, he'd heard what sounded distinctly like a gunshot moments before making his call. The gunshot report electrified the command center. Harrison immediately ordered tactical teams to establish a perimeter around the Whitmore cabin while keeping a safe distance. Through swirling snow, officers reported seeing movement inside, a man's silhouette passing occasionally in front of frost-rimmed windows. "We need to approach this carefully," Agent Coleman warned, unfolding a topographical map of the area. "Whitmore is cornered and armed. The girl is our priority, but this terrain gives him multiple escape routes through the woods if he panics." Rebecca stood by the sheriff's office window, watching snowflakes grow thicker by the minute. The storm was accelerating, already reducing visibility to less than a quarter mile. "I need to be there," she insisted, turning to Harrison with unwavering determination. "It's too dangerous," Harrison began, but Rebecca cut him off. "My voice might be the only thing that can reach Olivia after all this time. You need me there." After tense deliberation, Harrison reluctantly agreed. Though with strict conditions, Rebecca would remain in a secure vehicle at the command perimeter, a quarter mile from the cabin. By 8:30, a convoy of vehicles approached the area, lights off, engines muffled by the thickening blanket of snow. The cabin came into view, a rustic two-story structure nestled among towering pines, smoke curling from its stone chimney into the gray sky. From their vantage point, Rebecca could see a black SUV parked haphazardly by the front steps, its doors still open as if Whitmore had rushed inside upon arrival. FBI negotiator Frank Palmer established initial contact via a long-range speaker system. "Mr. Whitmore, This is the FBI. We need to confirm that Caroline is safe. The formal name felt like a dagger in Rebecca's heart, her daughter answering to someone else's name for almost 2 years. Minutes of silence followed before the cabin's radio crackled to life. "Get back. I have nothing to lose now." Whitmore's voice carried the unmistakable edge of desperation. "She's fine, but that could change if anyone approaches." As the snow intensified, the tactical teams held their positions, partially concealed by thickening drifts. Inside the command vehicle, Rebecca huddled under a thermal blanket, refusing hot coffee, her eyes never leaving the cabin where her daughter was being held. "Edward, we know about the arrangement with Mason," Palmer continued carefully. "Mary Ann has cooperated fully. Your best option is to resolve this peacefully." The negotiation continued through the early afternoon, with Whitmore growing increasingly agitated. Outside, the storm transformed the forest into a white labyrinth, temperature dropping steadily as daylight began to fade. "Let me speak to her," Rebecca finally pleaded with Harrison. "Let me talk to Olivia." After consulting with the psychological specialists on site, Harrison agreed. With trembling hands, Rebecca took the radio microphone, her voice barely steady. "Olivia, sweetheart, it's Mom. I know you must be confused and frightened, but I'm here waiting for you. Remember Sir Poulos? He's with me." The silence that followed seemed eternal, broken finally by a small, hesitant voice. "Mom, you didn't die in the sea with Dad? Uncle Ed said you died." Rebecca pressed her hand against her mouth to stifle a sob, eyes meeting Harrison's with silent triumph. Olivia remembered her, recognized her voice after all this time. Before Rebecca could respond, Whitmore seized control of the radio again, his voice frantic. "Enough. I want written guarantees, a helicopter, and safe passage to Mexico. You have 1 hour." While negotiations continued as a distraction, tactical teams moved silently through deepening snow, establishing positions closer to the cabin. The fading daylight and worsening storm provided crucial cover for their approach. At 6:15, disaster nearly struck when Whitmore spotted movement outside a window. "I see what you're doing," he shouted through the radio. "Conversation over. I'm counting to 10, and then everyone will regret this." Harrison made the decision instantly. At 6:17, a flashbang grenade detonated near the front door, creating a disorienting sensory overload as tactical teams breached the cabin from multiple entry points simultaneously. Rebecca, unable to remain in the vehicle any longer, broke protocol and ran toward the cabin. The snow was nearly knee-deep, her progress agonizingly slow, as shouts and commotion erupted from inside the structure. She stopped abruptly as the front door burst open. An FBI agent emerged, carrying a small figure wrapped in a heavy blanket. Even from a distance, Rebecca instantly recognized the face, thinner, older, with darker hair, but unmistakably Olivia. Her daughter looked disoriented and frightened, but alive. 6 months later, the beach at Montauk Point basked in summer sunshine. Rebecca sat on a weathered bench, watching Olivia carefully examining shells along the shoreline. The transition back to her real name had been just one step in the intensive psychological therapy that was helping reconnect her fragmented memories. Olivia had struggled at first, torn between confusing loyalties and traumatic recollections. The Whitmores had not been physically abusive, but the psychological damage of forced identity change had left deep scars. The trial of Edward Whitmore, currently underway in federal court, meant Olivia had to revisit painful memories with therapists to prepare for possibly testifying. When Olivia turned toward Rebecca, holding up a particularly beautiful spiral shell with a hesitant smile, Rebecca felt a familiar warmth spread through her chest. They weren't completely healed, perhaps never would be, but they had found their way back to each other. As Rebecca walked toward her rediscovered daughter, she glanced toward the Montauk Lighthouse, standing tall against the horizon. Once a symbol of unimaginable loss, it now represented something entirely different, a beacon that had eventually guided her family home, even if Thomas could only be present in the memories they now worked diligently to preserve and honor.